Lonely cowboy notices bruises on his mail-order bride. What he did next shocked the whole town. Ethan Carter lived a quiet life on the edge of the western plains. His small ranch stretched for miles, surrounded by rolling fields of golden grass that swayed gently in the wind. Every morning he woke before the sun, the soft light spilling over the horizon, and went about his chores in silence. The horses needed feeding, the cows needed milking, and the fences needed checking. For years, this had been his life: hard work, long days, and evenings spent alone in the small cabin he had built with his own hands. He liked the peace of the open land, but sometimes in the quiet moments when the work was done, a heavy feeling of loneliness would settle in his chest. Ethan wasn't an unkind man. He was known in town for being reliable and honest, the sort of person people could trust, yet he kept to himself most of the time. He had friends in the town, of course, and he exchanged greetings at the general store or at church on Sundays, but no one knew much about his life beyond the ranch. There were stories about him, some whispered, some openly discussed, but Ethan never bothered with them. He had a simple philosophy: work hard, stay honest, and let your actions speak for you. Even with all this, the quiet of his life sometimes weighed heavily on him. Nights were the hardest. The sun would sink below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of red and orange, and he would sit on his porch, listening to the wind rustle through the grass. The sound was calming, yes, but it also reminded him of the emptiness in the house. His heart ached for companionship, someone to share the simple joys of life with, a warm meal, a laugh, or even just the quiet presence of another person at the end of a long day. It was on one of these lonely evenings that Ethan made a decision he had been thinking about for months. He had seen advertisements in the newspapers about mail-order brides, women seeking new beginnings in America. He had read their letters carefully, wondering if he could find someone to share his life with. Many men in his town had considered it as a solution to loneliness, but Ethan had been cautious. He wanted more than just a companion. He wanted a partner, someone who could understand him and perhaps even appreciate the life he had built in the middle of nowhere. After weeks of hesitation, Ethan finally sent a letter. He described himself simply: a hard-working rancher looking for someone honest, kind, and willing to build a life together. Bah. He wrote about the open fields, the animals, and the peaceful life he could offer. He promised honesty, respect, and a steady hand through the storms of life. It took courage to send that letter, and even more courage to hope that someone would respond. Then, one day, he received a reply. The letter was neatly written, filled with careful words and gentle hopes. It was from a woman named Clara, a soft-spoken woman from a distant state. What time did they take? Her letter told of her life, her dreams, and her desire for a fresh start. She had faced difficulties in her past, and she sought a life filled with calm, safety, and honesty. Reading her words, Ethan felt a spark of hope that he hadn't felt in years. There was something about her sincerity that touched him, a quiet strength that he thought might complement his own life on the plains. The months that followed were filled with letters back and forth. They shared stories of their days, the small details that made life real and personal. Ethan told Clara about the ranch, the routines, and even the challenges of keeping the land in order. Clara shared her dreams of learning to ride horses, tending to a garden, and creating a cozy home filled with warmth. Each letter built a connection that neither had expected, but both welcomed. Bridged the distance between them, turning uncertainty into hope and loneliness into anticipation. Finally, the day arrived. Clara would travel across states to meet Ethan in person. He felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness he hadn't experienced in years. The town buzzed with curiosity when they heard the news. Mail-order marriages were rare, and a young woman arriving to join a quiet rancher was a story that drew attention. But Ethan tried to focus on the most important thing: meeting Clara, seeing her face, and finally stepping into the life they had both imagined through their letters. The train arrived on a warm spring morning. The sun was just rising, casting golden light over the town and the tracks. Ethan stood on the platform, his heart beating faster than usual. He scanned the crowd of passengers, looking for her. Then he saw her, a woman standing alone, holding a small suitcase, her eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Clara was more beautiful than he had imagined, though it wasn't just her appearance that struck him. It was the calm, quiet confidence she carried, the same sincerity that had shone through her letters. When their eyes met, Ethan felt a strange relief wash over him. She walked toward him slowly, uncertain, and he extended his hand in greeting. Clara smiled softly, a little shy, and they exchanged words that were simple but meaningful. In that moment the world seemed to pause for them. The noise of the town, the whispers of the crowd, the clatter of the train all faded into the background. It was just the two of them, standing on the platform, ready to step into a life together that was still unknown but filled with possibility. The ride to the ranch was quiet, filled with polite conversation and shared glances. Ethan showed her the fields, the barn, the stables, and the cozy cabin he had built. Clara listened attentively, her eyes wide with wonder and admiration. For Ethan, it was strange and wonderful to have someone new to share his world with. He had imagined this moment countless times, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality of it. The small joys, the awkward silences, and the thrill of discovering someone truly new in his life. Evening came, and the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in rich purples and oranges. They sat on the porch, watching the light fade over the open plains. Clara spoke about her dreams, her hopes for learning the ways of the ranch, and her desire to build a home filled with warmth and care. Ethan listened, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. We realized that the life he had always thought was lonely could now be shared, and that sharing it with the right person could make even the hardest days brighter. As night fell, they lit a small lantern and prepared for their first evening together in the cabin. Clara moved quietly, arranging her belongings and adjusting to the new environment. Ethan watched her, feeling a mix of protectiveness and admiration. There was a fragility to her at times, a hint of uncertainty, but also a quiet strength that shone through when she laughed at small things or carefully tended to her tasks. He thought of all the letters they had exchanged and how those words had now come to life in the form of this gentle, kind woman sitting beside him. Ethan went to bed that night with a heart that felt heavier and lighter at the same time. He had spent so many years alone, managing the ranch and surviving in solitude. Now, with Clara by his side, he felt the first stirrings of hope and connection in a long time. The night was quiet except for the soft sound of wind through the grass, the occasional call of an owl, and the faint creak of the cabin settling. He knew the days ahead would be filled with challenges, adjustments, and perhaps struggles, but he also knew that facing them with Clara would be far better than facing them alone. In the distance, the town lights twinkled faintly, a reminder that life moved on beyond the plains. But for Ethan and Clara, this moment, this beginning, was theirs alone. It was a moment of possibilities, of tentative hope, and of a new chapter waiting to unfold. They didn't yet know what the future would bring. But for the first time in years, Ethan felt that he wasn't alone, and that maybe, just maybe, the long wait for companionship had been worth it. The days that followed were filled with small discoveries: how Clara reacted to the horses, how she learned to milk the cows, and how she adjusted to the rhythms of ranch life. Ethan found himself smiling more, laughing more, and noticing little details in life he had long ignored. The letters had been a bridge, but now the real work of building a life together had begun. And though he didn't know what challenges lay ahead, Ethan felt ready, for the first time in a long time, to face them with someone by his side. The first few weeks on the ranch passed in a mixture of excitement and adjustment. Breaths, Clara worked hard to learn the routines Ethan had followed for years. She woke early each morning, feeding the horses and helping with the cows, just as Ethan did. He watched her carefully, noticing the way she approached the animals with a mix of gentleness and determination. She was quick to learn, but there was something about her that made him worry sometimes.
Clara seemed hesitant around certain tasks, flinching at sudden noises or quick movements. At first, Ethan thought it was simply inexperience.
The horses could be unpredictable, the cows stubborn, and the wind sometimes whipped across the plains in sudden bursts. But as the days went on, he began to notice patterns. Certain movements, even a raised voice, caused her to tense or shrink back. Her hands sometimes shook, and she would rub her arms as if trying to hide them. Ethan's mind raced with questions. He had expected a period of adjustment when Clara arrived, but there was a depth to her caution that went beyond being new to ranch life. He didn't press her directly at first, giving her space to settle in, believing that trust needed to grow slowly. Still, he couldn't ignore the uneasy feeling that something was wrong, something she wasn't telling him. One morning, while Clara was fetching water from the well, Ethan noticed a faint bruise on her forearm. It was small and partially hidden beneath the long sleeve of her blouse, but he saw it clearly. His heart tightened. He had never seen bruises like that on anyone who worked so gently with animals, and the thought that she might be in pain, either physically or emotionally, made him uneasy. Clara noticed him looking and quickly adjusted her sleeve, offering a weak smile. "It's nothing," she said softly. "I tripped in the barn yesterday, just a little bump." Her voice was calm, almost too calm, and Ethan studied her carefully. He could sense that she wasn't telling the full story, but he didn't want to push her too hard. He had learned in his years alone that patience was sometimes the key to understanding. Days passed, and the bruises continued to appear in subtle ways. Sometimes they were on her arms, other times on her shoulders or back, always hidden under her clothing. Ethan felt a mixture of concern and frustration.
He didn't know how to help her if she wasn't ready to open up. Yet, he couldn't ignore what he saw.
Every small mark seemed to carry a story, a silent signal of a pain she had endured. Evenings on the porch became a time for quiet observation. Ethan and Clara would sit together, watching the sun dip below the horizon, and Ethan would gently ask about her day. At first, she spoke about chores and the weather, keeping the conversation light, but gradually she began to reveal small details about her past, not the painful parts, but the parts that gave Ethan hints about the difficulties she had faced. He listened without judgment, offering quiet support and understanding. Clara's hesitance wasn't limited to physical reactions. She seemed cautious about forming relationships in the town. When neighbors stopped by to welcome her or bring small gifts, she often smiled politely but kept her distance. Ethan noticed that she rarely made eye contact with strangers, and when she did, it was fleeting and careful. It was clear that trust had not come easily for her. One afternoon, while checking the fences along the northern field, Ethan found Clara sitting beneath a large oak tree. Round in the shade, her hands folded in her lap.
He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her.
"Clara," he said gently, "is everything all right?" She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and relief. For a moment she said nothing, and Ethan waited patiently. "Best." Finally she whispered, I'm okay." But he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers gripped each other tightly. He sensed that there was more she wasn't saying, a hidden weight that she carried silently. Ethan decided that he needed to find a way to show her she was safe without pushing too hard. Over the next days he made small gestures, leaving fresh flowers by the cabin door, bringing her tea when she worked late in the barn, and speaking to her in a calm, steady voice when he noticed her flinching. He tried to show her that the ranch was a place of safety, that mistakes and accidents were part of life, and that she didn't need to hide anything from him. Slowly, Clara began to relax, though the process was far from complete. She laughed more freely when the horses did something amusing, and she started to engage in small conversations about town life. Yet Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was still hidden, something she feared to reveal, boundaries. But the bruises were a constant reminder that Clara carried memories or experiences that had left marks, both visible and invisible. One evening, a strong windstorm swept across the plains. The sky turned dark with clouds, and rain pounded against the roof of the cabin. Clara clutched the curtains, shivering despite the warmth inside. Ethan noticed the tremor in her hands and offered his coat. She hesitated, then accepted it, pressing herself close to him. "It's just the storm," he said softly. "You're safe here." That night, after the storm passed, Clara opened up in small ways. She spoke about being afraid of loud noises, of sudden movements, of people getting angry. She didn't speak about her past directly, but Ethan could piece together that she had endured hardships that left her wary and cautious. Breath. He held her hand, offering silent reassurance, knowing that trust and healing could not be rushed. Ethan also observed that the townspeople were curious about Clara. This whispered questions. Others watched from a distance. He could see that she was uncomfortable with the attention, and he made sure to protect her from unnecessary scrutiny. He wanted her to feel that the ranch and the open plains were a world of her own, a place where she could be herself without fear. Despite the challenges, there were moments of light and joy. Clara began tending a small garden, planting flowers and vegetables. She laughed when the chickens chased her or when the cows wandered off, needing to be rounded up. Ethan found himself smiling at her reactions, grateful for the warmth she brought to his once lonely home. The bruises, though still occasionally visible, were accompanied by moments of life and laughter, small signs of healing in progress. It was during one quiet afternoon, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, that Ethan noticed a more serious bruise on Clara's arm. This one wasn't small or easily hidden. It was a deep purple, and it made his heart ache to see it. He could no longer pretend that everything was minor or accidental. He approached her carefully, kneeling beside her. "Clara, please tell me what happened," he said softly, his voice steady but filled with concern. She flinched at his words but didn't pull away. Her eyes filled with tears, and she finally admitted that she had experienced hardships in her past that left her with these marks. But her confession was enough for Ethan to understand that she had suffered, perhaps at the hands of people who should have cared for her. He didn't judge her or her past. He simply held her hand and promised that she was safe now. From that moment, Ethan's perspective changed. He realized that his role was not just as a companion, but as a protector, a partner, who could offer safety, understanding, and patience. He also understood that healing would take time, that trust could not be demanded, and that every small step forward was a victory. Days turned into weeks, and with Ethan's steady support, Clara began to regain confidence. She still wore long sleeves to hide bruises, but she smiled more, laughed more, and even ventured into town for small errands. Ethan could see the change, subtle but real, and it filled him with hope. The bruises, while still a part of her, were no longer symbols of fear alone. They were reminders of survival, resilience, and the journey ahead. Yet, the shadow of the past lingered. Ethan knew that there were moments when Clara would flinch, when her hands would shake, or when she would retreat inward. These moments reminded him that healing was a process, one that required patience, understanding, and unwavering support. He resolved to be there for her, to help her navigate the challenges of ranch life and the memories she carried, no matter how long it took. The townspeople began to notice the subtle change in Clara as well. They saw her tending the garden, helping with animals, and even speaking more confidently with neighbors. While some still whispered about her past, many began to respect the quiet strength she showed each day. Ethan watched with quiet pride, knowing that his patience and care were helping her find her place, not just on the ranch, but in the world around them. By the end of the season, Clara had grown stronger in ways that surprised even her.
He could ride a horse with confidence, milk cows without hesitation, and face small challenges on the ranch with a sense of accomplishment. Yet the bruises remained as silent reminders of what she had endured.
Ethan never mentioned them again unless she did, focusing instead on building trust and offering steady support. In those quiet moments on the plains, Ethan realized that the connection they shared was deeper than companionship. It was rooted in understanding, empathy, and the shared recognition of hardship and hope. He had come to the ranch seeking a partner, but he had found much more. A person with courage, resilience, and the capacity to heal. And while the road ahead was uncertain, he knew that together they could face whatever challenges life would bring. Life on the ranch had settled into a rhythm, but Ethan knew that beneath the calm, Clara was still carrying the weight of her past. Each day he watched her smile more freely, laugh more easily, and even enjoy simple chores around the farm. Yet there were moments when she would pause, her eyes clouded, her hands trembling slightly. And he knew that her pain had not vanished. It had only been quieted.
It is a bright afternoon when the event occurred that would change everything.
Ethan had been working in the northern field mending a section of fence that had been damaged by a recent storm. Clara had gone into town earlier to pick up supplies, but she returned sooner than expected, carrying a small basket of groceries. As she stepped onto the ranch, Ethan noticed that she seemed uneasy, glancing around nervously as if expecting someone or something.
"Clara!"
he called softly, putting down his tools.
"Are you all right?"
She flinched at his voice, then looked at him and forced a small smile. "I'm fine," she said, though her tone lacked conviction. There was a tremor in her voice that made Ethan's chest tighten. He knew that she was holding something back, and this time it felt more urgent than ever. As she walked past him toward the cabin, Ethan followed quietly. He wanted to give her space but also felt the need to be near her, to offer support if she needed it. When she entered the kitchen, she set down the basket and leaned against the counter, closing her eyes for a moment. Ethan noticed that her hands were shaking more than usual, and that faint purple bruise on her forearm had deepened. "Clara," Ethan said gently, stepping closer. "Please. You don't have to hide anything from me. You're safe here. Always." Her eyes opened, filled with a mixture of fear, sadness, and relief. She bit her lip, hesitating, as if trying to gather courage. Ethan remained calm, kneeling slightly to be at her level, showing her that he was not there to judge, only to listen. Finally she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "Ethan, I need to tell you the truth. About me. About everything." Ethan nodded, his heart pounding. He had sensed this moment was coming, but now that it was here, he realized how heavy it might be.
He reached out and took her hand in his, giving it a gentle squeeze. "I'm here," he said simply.
"I want to hear everything, whenever you're ready." Clara swallowed hard and began slowly, hesitating between words, tears welling up in her eyes. She spoke of a childhood that had been difficult, of people who had hurt her emotionally and physically, of experiences that had left invisible scars as well as visible ones. She did not go into cruel or inappropriate details. Rather, she spoke of fear, loneliness, and the constant feeling that no one was safe to trust. Ethan listened quietly, absorbing each word. There was a mixture of anger, sorrow, and compassion stirring within him, but he kept his tone gentle, never interrupting her. Every detail she shared gave him more understanding, more reason to protect her, and more admiration for the courage it took to finally speak. When she paused, exhausted from the emotional weight of speaking, Ethan held her close. "Clara," he said softly, "you survived all of that. Breath. You're still standing. And I promise, here, on this ranch, you're safe. You don't have to be afraid anymore." For a long moment they stayed like that, the quiet of the ranch enveloping them, the distant calls of animals providing a comforting backdrop. Clara leaned into him, taking a deep breath, letting herself feel the security that had been missing from her life for so long. She realized in that instant that Ethan wasn't just a companion. He was someone she could rely on completely. After a while, she pulled back slightly, wiping her tears. "I've never told anyone all of this," she admitted. "I've been afraid. Afraid that people would think less of me, that they would leave me."
Ethan shook his head gently.
No one could think less of you, Clara.
"You're brave, stronger than most people I know, and I'm not going anywhere. We face this together. Whatever comes next, we face it as partners." The emotional release brought a shift in their relationship. Clara's guardedness softened, and Ethan could sense that a deep trust was beginning to form. It was not immediate, nor was it complete, but the moment marked a turning point. For the first time, Clara allowed herself to feel that she belonged somewhere, that she had a place where she could be safe and respected. Ethan, in turn, reflected on the responsibility he now bore. He had always wanted companionship, but now he realized that it was about much more than simple friendship or romance. Clara needed someone who could provide stability, protection, and understanding, and he was willing to give it. He knew that patience would be required, that there would be days when progress seemed slow or moments when her past would haunt her, but he was ready for it. The town, meanwhile, began to notice subtle changes. Clara interacted more with neighbors, sometimes joining Ethan in small community events, yet there was a quiet aura of resilience about her. Those who had whispered about her past now saw a woman who carried herself with dignity, despite the scars of hardship. Ethan watched her carefully, proud of the strength she was slowly revealing to the world. One evening, a few weeks later, a minor accident occurred in the barn. The horse had become startled and kicked a small piece of equipment, narrowly missing Clara. She froze for a moment, her body tensing as if reliving past fears. Ethan was immediately at her side, holding her steady. "It's all right," he whispered, keeping his voice calm. "You're safe. Nothing will hurt you here." Clara took a deep breath, her hands gripping his arm for support. In that moment she realized how much she had come to rely on his presence, how essential it had become to feel someone steady beside her. The incident, though minor, was symbolic. It showed her that fear could be managed, that she didn't have to face life's uncertainties alone. That night, they sat on the porch together, watching the stars emerge over the open plains. The cool night air carried the scent of grass and earth, a calming contrast to the intensity of the day. Clara rested her head on Ethan's shoulder, and for the first time, she felt a genuine sense of peace. It was the culmination of weeks of effort, patience, and understanding. She had faced her fears, shared her story, and discovered that she was not alone. Ethan, looking at her, felt a profound sense of purpose. He realized that the ranch, the work, and even the solitude he had once cherished were no longer the center of his life. Clara had become his priority, and he would protect her, nurture her, and help her heal. The realization filled him with determination. He knew that challenges would come. but the bond they had formed would provide strength for both of them. The days after Clara's confession were filled with a quiet new rhythm. She worked with renewed confidence, taking on tasks she had once feared. Ethan offered gentle guidance, and she began to smile more openly, laugh more freely, and even take small risks around the ranch. It was not perfection. There were still moments of hesitation, but the change was undeniable. Their evenings together became a time of mutual comfort and reflection. They would talk about dreams for the future, the life they wanted to build, and the small victories of each day. Ethan noticed that Clara was beginning to plan ahead, to take initiative, and to envision a life free from fear. The bruises, though still visible at times, became less of a symbol of pain and more a reminder of survival and resilience. As the town observed them, they saw a story of quiet courage unfold. Clara, once timid and cautious, now carried herself with a sense of strength that inspired others. Ethan's role as her protector and partner was evident, and the community began to respect the care and patience he offered. Whispers of curiosity were replaced with admiration for the pair who faced hardship together and emerged stronger. One day, as the sun rose over the plains, Ethan and Clara stood at the edge of the field, looking out at the horizon. The work of the ranch lay before them, but so did the promise of a future they would face together. Clara turned to Ethan, her eyes filled with gratitude and trust. "Psst, thank you," she said simply, "for everything. For believing in me." Ethan smiled gently. "No thanks needed," he said. "We're in this together, always." In that moment, both of them understood something vital. The past could not be erased, but it could be honored, learned from, and left behind as they moved forward. Breaking. They had faced the crisis together, and now the foundation of trust, understanding, and love was stronger than ever. The journey was far from over, but they had crossed the most difficult bridge, and together they were ready to face whatever came next. After Clara had shared her story, life on the ranch slowly began to change. The air between Ethan and Clara felt lighter, yet Ethan knew that true safety and healing would take more than kind words and quiet support. He realized that the past Clara had endured was not just hers alone. It was connected to systems and people beyond the ranch. If she was to truly heal, steps needed to be taken to protect her and make sure that no one could take advantage of her again. Ethan spent long hours thinking about the right way to act. He wanted to be careful, but he also knew that time was of the essence. Clara had trusted him with her story, and he could not let fear or hesitation stop him from standing up for her. One morning, as the sun rose over the plains, he resolved to take action, not in anger, but with clarity, purpose, and courage. He began by speaking quietly with Clara, asking her what she wanted. "Best in divorce. You have a voice now," he told her. "You've shared your story with me. If you want, we can make sure others know too, so no one can hurt you again." "But I will not do anything without you." Clara hesitated, her hands twisting nervously. The thought of drawing attention to her past made her anxious. But looking at Ethan, seeing the determination in his eyes and the calm steadiness in his voice, she began to feel a sense of hope. Perhaps, she thought, there was a way to protect herself without fear. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's do it." Together. They started by documenting everything carefully. Clara wrote down the events of her past in her own words, describing the hardships she had endured, the people who had caused her pain, and the moments when she had felt powerless. Ethan encouraged her, helping organize her thoughts and ensuring that her account was clear and honest. It was a painful process, but also a liberating one. For the first time, Clara could speak freely, knowing that someone trusted her completely. Once they had the account written, Ethan decided to take it to the town council. He wanted the authorities to understand that Clara's situation was serious, and that protective measures were necessary. Some townspeople were curious and even skeptical at first. They had seen the quiet rancher and the soft-spoken woman, but they had not known the depth of the challenges Clara had faced. When Ethan presented her story calmly, respectfully, and with clarity, the room fell silent. The council listened, taking notes, asking questions, and showing concern. Ethan spoke with careful attention, never exaggerating but making sure they understood that Clara needed support and that the community had a role to play in ensuring her safety. Clara, standing quietly beside him, felt her heart race. For a moment she worried about judgment or criticism, but as she looked around the room she saw only respect and concern. The people who had once whispered about her past now saw a woman of courage and a man who would stand by her without hesitation. By the end of the meeting, the council had agreed to provide resources for Clara. They offered guidance, legal protections, and connections to support services that could help her fully recover. For Ethan, the relief was immense. He had always wanted to protect Clara, but now the town itself was acknowledging her right to safety and dignity. It was a victory not just for her, but for the quiet principle that standing up for what is right matters, even in a small town. After the council meeting, word spread slowly but surely. Neighbors, friends, and even those who had been distant began offering support. Some came by the ranch with gifts of food or flowers. Others helped with chores or offered words of encouragement. Clara, who had once shied away from attention, now began to accept these gestures with grace. She smiled more openly, laughed more freely, and even shared her story with those she trusted. The community that had seemed distant was now becoming a source of strength. Ethan and Clara also took steps to make their home even safer. They repaired the fences, installed stronger locks on the doors, and created a routine that allowed Clara to feel secure in every corner of the ranch. Every morning Ethan checked that she was comfortable and confident, and every evening they would sit on the porch together, sharing quiet moments of reflection and gratitude. The transformation in Clara was gradual but remarkable. She began tending a larger garden, experimenting with vegetables and flowers she had never grown before. She helped with the animals, gaining confidence in her ability to manage the horses and cows on her own. The bruises, once a constant reminder of her fear, became fewer and lighter, as if the security and care surrounding her had begun to heal not just her body, but her spirit as well. Ethan noticed small changes in her demeanor that brought him joy. She laughed spontaneously at the antics of the animals, spoke freely with neighbors, and even took initiative in planning chores or small improvements to the ranch. It was as if each act of independence and courage was a victory, a small declaration that she was no longer defined by the hardships of her past. One evening, a minor celebration took place at the ranch. Ethan had invited a few trusted neighbors to help Clara feel accepted and valued. They brought simple gifts, shared food, and told stories about the land and its history. Clara participated, laughing at the gentle teasing from neighbors, and even sharing a story of her own. The sense of community, once intimidating, now felt like a warm embrace. It was during this evening that a young neighbor approached Clara and asked if she could help plant some flowers. Clara agreed, guiding the neighbor carefully, showing her how to space the seeds and water the soil. As she worked, she realized how much she had grown. Just weeks before, she would have shied away from such interaction. Now she felt confident enough to lead, teach, and connect. Ethan watched from a distance, quietly proud. He understood that the real success wasn't just in the safety measures or the council's support, but in the small moments when Clara discovered her own strength. The courage to laugh, the bravery to teach, the confidence to engage with others. These were victories far greater than any protection plan could offer. The town began to speak differently about them. Where curiosity or skepticism had existed before, now there was respect. People admired Ethan's steadfast support and Clara's courage in facing her past. Slowly, the whispers of gossip were replaced with words of encouragement, and the couple became an example of resilience and partnership in the community.
At night, the ranch was calm.
Clara and Ethan would sit together on the porch, listening to the distant calls of animals and the rustling of the grass in the wind. They reflected on the journey they had taken, from the first hesitant steps of a mail-order marriage to the moments of trust, revelation, and courage that had followed. Each day brought new challenges, but also new victories, and they faced them together. Clara often spoke of her gratitude.
"I never thought I could feel safe," she said one evening, leaning against Ethan's shoulder.
But now, I finally understand what it means to trust someone completely. Ethan smiled, his eyes soft.
"You deserve that safety," he replied, "and I'll do everything I can to make sure you always have it. We're in this together, every step of the way."
The ranch, once a place of solitude, had transformed into a home filled with hope, security, and connection. The fields, the animals, and even the small cabin had taken on a new significance. They were symbols of a life rebuilt, of trust restored, and of a partnership that had grown stronger through patience and care. Even the seasons seemed to reflect the change. Spring brought new growth, summer warmth, autumn golden leaves, and the quiet strength of winter, all marking the passage of time and the steady progress of healing. Clara flourished alongside the land, learning, laughing, and growing confident with each passing day. Through it all, Ethan remained a constant presence. He offered guidance when needed, support when required, and unconditional care at all times. He understood that their journey was not only about survival or companionship, but about building a life rooted in mutual respect, trust, and resilience. And so, the ranch became more than just a home. It became a sanctuary. Clara, once hesitant, now walked freely through its fields and barns. Ethan, once lonely, now had someone to share the quiet sunsets, the daily chores, and the joys of life. Together they had faced the challenges, confronted the past, and created a foundation for a future filled with hope, safety, and love. The months after the town council meeting and the support from neighbors passed in a quiet, steady rhythm. The ranch, once a place of solitude, had transformed into a home filled with warmth, laughter, and life. Clara and Ethan had settled into routines that brought them comfort, but also allowed them to grow as individuals and as a couple. Every day there were small victories to celebrate, from a successful harvest to the laughter of a chicken chasing after a stray feed bucket. Clara had grown stronger, both physically and emotionally. She no longer flinched at sudden movements or loud noises the way she once had. Her hands no longer trembled when she worked in the barn, and her eyes, once guarded and fearful, now sparkled with curiosity and confidence. Each day on the ranch reinforced the sense of safety she had slowly begun to feel, and the bruises that had once marked her body and spirit had faded, leaving only the gentle reminders of resilience and survival. Ethan watched her with quiet pride. He remembered the early days when she had arrived timid and unsure, and the journey it had taken to reach this point. The first letters they had exchanged, the long rides to the town, the small gestures of trust, and the emotional confession had all led to this moment. Now, as he saw her tending the garden, laughing at the antics of the animals, and moving confidently around the ranch, he knew that the patient support and care he had offered had made a real difference. Their evenings together had become a cherished ritual. After the chores were done, they would sit on the porch, wrapped in blankets if the weather was cool, and watch the sun set over the rolling fields. They spoke about the events of the day, their hopes for the future, and the small joys they had discovered in the simple routines of ranch life. Sometimes they sat in silence, letting the natural sounds of the plains, the wind through the grass, the distant calls of birds, the gentle lowing of cows, fill the quiet spaces between them. On one particular evening, Clara spoke softly, her voice thoughtful. "Ethan," she said, "I never thought life could feel like this. Peaceful, safe, even happy. I didn't know I could ever feel this way." Ethan turned to her, his expression gentle. "It's been a journey," he replied,
But you've earned this. Every step you've taken, every moment of courage, it all led to now. And we'll keep building from here, together." Clara smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that reached her eyes. Grasp. She leaned into him, feeling the steady warmth of his presence. For the first time in her life, she could imagine a future that was not shadowed by fear. The past had shaped her, yes, but it did not define her. She had survived, healed, and grown, and now she could embrace a life of hope, companionship, and fulfillment. The town continued to observe their progress. Neighbors who had once whispered and speculated now treated Clara with respect and admiration. They admired her courage and resilience, as well as Ethan's steadfast support and patience. People began to ask for advice, share small gifts, and offer help with the ranch. Clara, once hesitant to engage with the community, now greeted neighbors warmly, sharing stories and laughter, and forming connections she had never thought possible. Ethan, too, felt a transformation within himself. He had once valued solitude and quiet work above all else, believing that companionship might complicate his simple life. Now, he realized that true fulfillment came not from being alone, but from sharing life with someone who trusted, respected, and understood him. Clara had brought color, warmth, and meaning to his days, and the ranch had become more than just a livelihood. It had become a home, a sanctuary, and a place of love. They celebrated milestones quietly but meaningfully. The first successful harvest of the season became an opportunity to share a simple meal together, fresh from the land they had nurtured. They laughed as they worked side by side, their movements in sync, each helping the other without needing to speak. The animals, too, seemed to recognize the harmony, moving calmly around them, adding to the sense of peace that had settled over the ranch. Clara took special pride in her garden. She had expanded it, planting flowers and vegetables she had never attempted before. Each bloom, each ripe vegetable, became a symbol of growth, hope, and renewal. Ethan admired her dedication, watching as she poured care and attention into every plant. The garden became a metaphor for their life together, a place nurtured with patience, love, and attention, producing beauty and abundance in return. Winter brought its own challenges, but also a sense of comfort. Grasp. Snow covered the plains, and the ranch took on a serene, almost magical appearance. Ethan and Clara worked together to ensure the animals were safe and warm, chopping firewood and preparing meals for the long evenings. The cold outside made the warmth inside the cabin even more precious. They would sit by the fire, reading, talking, or simply enjoying each other's company. Clara sometimes reflected on the past, but she no longer felt trapped by it. She had learned to face the memories with strength and resilience, knowing that they were part of her story, but did not control her future. Dance. One evening, as the northern lights danced faintly across the dark sky, Clara spoke again about her journey. "I didn't know I could trust anyone," she said softly. "I didn't know I could feel safe. But now, I feel like I can face anything." Ethan held her close, his voice steady. "And you can. We've faced so much together already, and we'll face whatever comes next as a team. You're never alone again." As the seasons passed, Clara became more active in the town. She helped at the local market, shared her knowledge of gardening and cooking, and even assisted with small community projects. Her confidence and presence inspired others, especially young women who had faced their own struggles. Ethan watched with quiet pride as Clara became not only a partner at the ranch, but a valued member of the broader community. Their bond strengthened further through shared experiences and challenges. When a sudden storm damaged part of the barn, they worked together to repair it, laughing at small mishaps and celebrating the completion of the work. When a calf was born unexpectedly, they cared for it together, marveling at the new life and the joy it brought.
Each shared experience, whether challenging or joyful, reinforced their connection and deepened the trust they had built. 4. Clara also found time for reflection. She often walked alone along the edge of the fields, observing the horizon and thinking about how far she had come. The fears that had once controlled her life now felt distant, replaced by a sense of strength, independence, and hope. She realized that the bruises, both physical and emotional, had left her resilient, capable of facing adversity with courage. And she knew that Ethan had played a crucial role in that journey, providing patience, support, and unwavering belief in her worth. Ethan, for his part, reflected on how much his life had changed. The ranch was no longer a place of mere survival. It was a place of growth, love, and partnership. Clara had brought light into his quiet life, teaching him that companionship was not a burden, but a gift. Together they had turned challenges into opportunities, pain into healing, and solitude into a life full of connection and joy. As spring returned, the ranch bloomed with new life. Flowers blossomed, animals thrived, and the fields yielded healthy crops. Ethan and Clara worked together to prepare for the season, laughing and sharing small moments of joy. The town watched with admiration as the couple demonstrated resilience, partnership, and grace. Clara, once timid and fearful, now moved confidently through both the ranch and the community, embodying the strength that had always been within her. One evening, as the sun set in vibrant colors over the horizon, Clara and Ethan stood side by side, taking in the view. The ranch stretched before them, alive and thriving, a testament to their hard work, courage, and shared dedication. Clara turned to Ethan, her eyes shining with gratitude. "I never imagined life could be this full," she said softly. Ethan smiled, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "It's because we built it together," he said. "Every day, every challenge, every moment of trust, it all led us here. And we'll keep building. Together." For Clara, the journey had been transformative. She had faced fear, shared her story, and reclaimed her life. She had discovered strength she didn't know she possessed, and she had learned the value of trust, patience, and partnership. For Ethan, the journey had brought a deeper understanding of love, compassion, and the power of standing by someone through their struggles. Together they had created a home that was more than shelter. It was a sanctuary of hope, trust, and shared dreams. The ranch, once a place of solitude and labor, had become a symbol of resilience, healing, and the possibilities of a life built on patience, courage, and love. As night fell and the stars filled the sky, Ethan and Clara sat together on the porch, reflecting on all they had overcome. They had faced fear, uncertainty, and pain, but they had emerged stronger, closer, and more connected than ever. The journey was far from over, but they had learned that together there was no challenge they could not face. In the quiet of the plains, with the soft sounds of nature around them, they found a profound peace. They had built more than a life. They had built a partnership, a home, and a future filled with hope. And in that moment, under the wide open sky, they knew that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, hand in hand, hearts united, ready for the journey that life would continue to bring.